everyone. Today we have the new episode, and this episode is very important. We're gonna discuss about longevity and healthcare system. We have our world famous speakers, Mr. David Schumacher, Professor Edward, Professor David J. Kelly, and Professor Donalds. Uh, so I want to start from Professor David Schumacher. So how you want to share your view about longevity?
Yes, hello, Sharif. Yeah, big topic. Longevity, healthy aging, health span, so much to talk about. So I think the tough part today will be maintaining a focus for me and just limiting it to a few areas. But I'd like to start with a little bit of a broad background. I come here as the Applied Innovation Director from the U.S. Transhumanist Party, and I want to point, as I often do, out to our core values and our platform. And core value number one for the Transhumanist Party has to do specifically with this topic and promoting the use of science and technology to expand both health span and lifespan. So you can go out to the usual site, transhumanist-party.org, and take a look at core values. There's a particular platform plank that talks about removing barriers to research, and I have a suspicion that Edward will be talking about that in a little bit, so I'll leave more of that to him. What I want to say is I come at this whole topic with a cautiously optimistic viewpoint. As I look back in history, I see that there's been a natural progression of both health span and lifespan. And there's an article, I'll put the link to it in the private chat here. Maybe Sharif can share it out. I'll do that in just a bit. That talks a little bit about the evolution of health span, lifespan to humans. And besides the technical aspects that I like to get involved with, there's some social aspects that I found that were really interesting, how society has changed as health span and lifespan among humans has progressed. Now, there's a lot of talk in the news today about health span, lifespan, and just how far human health and life can be extended. There are some that talk about an age limit, a physical barrier somewhere in the 120s, number of years of age. I think the jury's still out on that, but I think also some of the technologies that will come to bear in the next decade or two could have an interesting aspect about that. Some of the high profile people that are really driving this discussion forward are like David Sinclair out of Harvard. It's hard to go anywhere. Exactly. It's hard to go anywhere where you can't come across credible scientists from a highly valued institution talking about this. The work of George Church is another one who is making it into the mainstream by being interviewed by mainstream news agencies and so forth. There are research organizations that are focused solely on this topic, and then there are enabling organizations like the Methuselah Foundation, for example, that is putting money into targeted research. Matter of fact, I love their slogan at the Methuselah Foundation. You go to their webpage and it says, making 90 the new 30 by 2030. That's a pretty empowering idea. And I don't think it's just an idle wish. You go there and take a look around and they'll give you some good ideas why this is a very definite possibility. Another one is the SENS Research Organization, and they're funding research into the damage repair approach to longevity. But all this takes money, and there's good news there too, because there are investment groups like the one by Sergey Young, the Longevity Vision Fund, which is targeting money specifically for this. And then I heard Jim Mellon out of the UK and read his book Juvenescence, and he has been a very powerful investor that is putting great amounts of money into this. And then there's a number of other smaller organizations as well. And it's in the popular consciousness. Last year now, I attended virtually a conference in Madrid called Transvision that's all about this topic. And prior to that, since 2016, there's been another popular conference. These are for lay people as well as those that work in this space. There's been another popular conference called RadFest that's been going on since 2016. So we're seeing this topic being addressed from all different parts of the space that's currently out there. When we come back around, perhaps I'll talk about some of the individual technologies and some of the other individuals that are involved. But for right now, I'd like to pass the baton.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Edward.
Yeah. Well, I, of course, agree completely with David Shoemaker. I'm a member of the Transhumanist Party as well, and have attended RadFest. I attended the first RadFest, and I've sponsored the last couple, and we'll be working with those folks. What I want to do is put this, and by the way, Sharif, thank you for doing this particular topic. You know, a lot of times we say, well, there's some things that are interesting here and this interesting there, and then there are life and death matters that really are serious. This is a life and death matter. I mean, what could be more important than not dying? Okay. I mean, and so that's what we're talking about here. All else that we talk about on these wonderful forums are sort of pointless if everyone's going to die off. Anyway, but what I want to do as kind of I'm with the Human Achievement Alliance as my organization, but what I want to do is kind of point to what the exponential technology is going to be driving in the future. And maybe in the second round, I can talk about some specifics about what we need to do to make sure that this future of people who, 90 is going to be the new 30, what we can do to bring that about. What I want to do is paint a picture of what is coming in the next decade or two. And I'll just hit 5 quick points here. Number one is that in the year 2001, it cost $100 million to sequence the human genome. It was done, among other people, by Greg Venter, whose office is right over here in Rockville, Maryland, or used to be. And then in 2007, instead of $100 million, it was $10 million. Today, to sequence your genome, it's under $1,000. I think Liz Parrish might be doing it for $500. I forget. Meaning we can customize and look at everything about you as an individual, not 72% of people who are between 30 and 40 or whatever. We can look at everything about you as an individual at a genetic level. That's the first thing. Number 2, analytic tools are getting better and better to be able to look at our genome, and not only our genome, but for example, our blood and other factors, and really understand exactly, for example, what you are prone to. Are you prone to Alzheimer's? Are you prone to certain illnesses and the like? And this is very important. A friend of ours, Dan Elton, who I know, David, Dan, last year he worked at the National Institutes for Health, and he recently moved to Boston to oversee their artificial intelligence work to monitor and to look at these kinds of issues. So the analytic tools are becoming better and better. Number 3 is the wearable and injectable diagnostics are becoming better and better. Meaning, everybody who has a smartphone can pretty much keep track of their sleep. They can keep track of their paces, how much they exercise, these kinds of things. Diabetics now can have something that's wearable. It keeps track of their blood sugar issues. And more these kinds of diagnostics are going to get better and better. So we can keep track of your electrolytes. We can keep track of all of the biology about you as a unique individual, not, again, 82% of people who are this and that and the other. You as an individual. That's the third thing, diagnostics. The fourth thing is real-time, real-world monitoring by an AI that has your genome and has all the particulars about your health situation. So it might be in the next 10 years, 20 years, hopefully it'll be sooner, that if you're about to have a heart attack, your AI will know it before you do, and the medics will be at your door. And with other ailments as well. Hopefully you won't even get to that point, but that's the fourth area is real world monitoring. The fifth area, the fifth factor that's going to go into this incredible longevity future are the tools of prevention. For example, most people know the CRISPR-Cas9 editing tool. That's a major one. The CRISPR-Cas9 2.0, it was announced about a year ago, a little less than a year ago, actually, that it's been used to turn off the production of tau proteins in neurons in the brain. What does that mean in English or any other major language? It's the clumping of tau proteins in the brain that is associated with Alzheimer's. My poor 90-year-old mom has Alzheimer's. I wish I'd been doing this 20 years ago. But the point is, we're literally getting to the point where researchers are toying with how to turn off Alzheimer's. I was just reading I've got a whole list of things I have to catch up on my reading about blood analysis now that can predict who's going to get COVID, who has the biggest chance of that. There are all these analytic tools now that you can use to essentially prevent your problems from happening to begin with. They're genetic and epigenetic, and we can talk about what epigenetic is in maybe a future round here. But the point is, those 5 factors point to a world 10 years, 20 years from now in which longevity is going to be real. You're not going to have to be 70 years old or 80 years old and either die or be decrepit and you're in a hospital bed for 10 years. That's not what we want. The final thing I'll say, and then I'll yield the floor to my colleagues here, is when I look at the progress of exponential technology, most notably communications and information, and I've often said that 15 years ago, nobody had smartphones. Now 87% of American adults have smartphones because of competition. What we need is a system that allows the emergence of a Steve Jobs for healthcare, to pull together all the factors and to present different packages to people so that we can monitor our own healthcare. Now, there are some challenges there's going to be, and hopefully I'll be around for the second round. I'll talk about the challenges and what we need to do in terms of FDA reform, things of that nature to actually get there, because there are a lot of barriers in the way. I'll just say one thing. I spent all of yesterday, pretty much, except for my board meeting, trying to get an appointment for one of my daughters for a doctor. And the insurance regulations are just, literally being on the phone, calling this one, calling that one, saying, do I have to put in this document? No, I got to put in that document, because we have 50 states with 50 separate sets of insurance regulations. It's literally illegal for me if my kids are receiving any help from the government, it's illegal for me to pay my family doctor who doesn't take that insurance to see my daughters. It's a crime for me to do that. That's how stupid the current system is. We can get into all that later, but the point is the exponential technology leaves open this incredible future. And all we have to do is unleash the Steve Jobs types of people and the great researchers like David Sinclair, Aubrey de Grey, and all to help create that future. And I'll yield the floor.
Thank you, Professor Edward. Professor David Kelly, if you respond to these questions, it's come from Noor Fazlin. What is the difference between aging and longevity?
Well, aging is getting old. It's the biological process that we go through as we age, and there's lots of biological indicators of that. Whereas the longevity is about how long you live. They're just two different things.
So, Professor, how actually AI, like any kind of AI, actually integrated with this longevity process? How does it works? How my developing nations will be benefited through this process?
Well, I think everyone will benefit as the knowledge is going to be fairly public. I think developing nations will struggle with some of the technology, but it will come. I know with my work, I'm a technologist. I'm into AI, but like one of the projects I did about 20 years ago was blood chemistry longevity models for these high-end longevity clinics. There one in Hawaii was the one that was paying me to build the models, and just dealt with all kinds of blood chemistry stuff where, we could, with these body parameters, this is the ranges and all of this kind of stuff. And then some of the more bleeding edge tech, like recently, that I've worked on having to do with longevity is these smart toilets. And I know that sounds crazy to people, and they haven't hit the market yet, but the one in particular that I worked with, but they've spent 6 years or 7 years, something like that. And these things do all kinds of analysis. You sit on that toilet, go to the bathroom, it's doing a urinalysis, and it has a mass spectrometer. Actually, the smallest known mass spectrometer that works in the world was developed by that team for those toilets. And all of that data can be put into these databases where you can analyze trends and different kinds of biological functions that feed into the ability to do longevity science and for people. I think the problem is like with the smart toilets, developing countries, it's going to take a while for them to get that stuff. It's like those toilets are going to be in the $100,000 range. And I hope a lot of us, like me and other people like that, can help bring the cost down and make it so it's available to everyone.
Thank you. Professor Donald.
I think this kind of optimism is interesting and exciting, but right now, at least for a while, we know so little about these processes that it's kind of hard to make a prediction. I think an interesting case is that they came out with a new drug that supposedly helps with Alzheimer's, and it reduces the beta amyloid plaques, but that didn't help. And so basically the drug doesn't work, and yet it got approved. It's incredibly expensive, and people are demanding it because it's around. And just like they're demanding horse dewormer to help them get cured from COVID and various kinds of things like that, the idea of what actually works and what we wish would work are really quite different. And right now, there's a very, very, very simple ways of having your life be relatively healthy for your whole lifespan. I mean, that's people make up about health span or whatever different kinds of things you make of it. But the point of the matter is if you start getting decrepit at say 60 years old or someplace like that, and you live to be 90, and you don't have mobility, and your cognitive functions are declining, and all those kinds of things, it's in a way you're just existing. Whereas there's other people who are contributing all the way until they drop dead. I had a friend who was a professional musician all her life, and I played with her in a band for a while, and she taught me a lot. And she was still gigging and giving piano lessons at 101, and then she just kind of went off a cliff in a period of about 4 or 5 months and then died. But she was totally active and totally with it all the way till she was 101. And so right now the question of whether we can extend life, in other words, make that number be 100 instead of being 101, say be 120, is still up in the air. It's hypothetically possible, but it hasn't happened. And so there's no cases of it happening. So just, it's interesting to speculate. It's interesting to try and figure it. And I'm going to say that personally, I look at small, high quality studies, and I ask myself, is it going to hurt, or is it worth giving a try? So I take a lot of different antioxidants and other kinds of things that help build your mitochondria and things like that. And I feel myself as an experiment, because basically the way that they'd actually be able to understand if these worked is to do it with hundreds of thousands of people. I want to say something else. Google attempted to try and figure out what made a healthy person. So they were gathering data. They actually hired an army of nurse practitioners who would take people's blood. They recruited people for this giant experiment that they were going to take, because it's easy for us to say, well, we want to have everybody be healthy. But the question about what is healthy is, I mean, it's not a data-driven thing. It's just kind of our intuitions. And we don't have the data yet to be able to answer that question. And even so, what do we mean? How do we know? So right now, almost anybody can have a good lifespan. They don't have to take special supplements or anything else like that. If they exercise every day, they stop eating red meat and start eating a plant-based diet as much as possible. With fish are good for you. The omega-3s in fish are really helpful. So, there's various kinds of things right now that you can do. The only drug that's been being tested for longevity in a really serious way is metformin. And I've been taking metformin forever. And so it's like, it's basically harmless. It's not, I mean, it's going to lower my blood sugar, which is a good thing anyway. And so, I don't mind experimenting on myself, but it's kind of expensive. And then I want to just finish up by pointing out that when you're looking at a healthy lifespan, what I said before about, like, it's something that you have to do yourself. You have to exercise. You have to eat right. And there's another aspect to it is you have to develop good social relations with people, because if people are not socially connected enough, there's a gene that stops expressing itself in the immune system, and it can actually just kill you to be basically lonely or alone. And so people need to develop that. And I was kind of leading into one thing that's important, which is in the developing world, having good water, having good sanitation, having enough to eat, all those kinds of things, having good food to eat. In the United States, there's the poor people in the United States have a tendency to spend money on high density food because it's inexpensive. So they'll eat McDonald's hamburgers and things like that, which will kill you deader than a mackerel. I mean, they're not healthy things. And so part of what we have to do is, as a society, start understanding about the basic things that can help people have a good and long life, and trying to get people to start doing that. But that's very, very complicated. And also now, when I'm thinking about it, I disagree with what Edward said about Steve Jobs. I think Steve Jobs is an illusion. I don't think he's that big of a deal, really, because what would wind up happening is the PC business was starting, these things were starting, somebody would have been the person who was the most successful at it. I mean, it would have just happened in every industry. What we do is we look back in the past and we create narratives about great men, but actual research shows that that's not really the way it works. We borrow ideas from each other, and you can't really, it's just our psychology that makes us like assume or believe that it's great men who cause these things to happen. So we have to have a balance where people have the opportunity to do creative things, but we also have to understand the fact of how interdependent we are and how no idea exists in a vacuum at all. So that's
Thank you. Thank you. We have our new guest. I think he's longevity expert, Professor Didar. So what you want to add for today's discussion? Hello, Mr. Didar, can you hear me?
I'm not sure that he can.
Okay.
Maybe go to Adam.
Oh, yes, Mr. Adam.
Thank you. Looks like it's frozen, but yeah. One of my favorite topics. Well, we know futurism is comprised of different ideas, priorities, interests, goals. For example, pain management, the abolition of suffering, hedonic engineering, AI, Internet of Things, VR, AR, cybernetic implants, nanotech, and many others. And of course, aging, or anti-aging, life extension, so on. And it was life extension that first got me interested in futurism and transhumanism. And that in particular was a big eureka moment for me, and the first one that introduced me to that sector. And then futurism and transhumanism in general, as a whole, made up all of these different disciplines. Before that, I was never that overly occupied with the issues of aging and death and so on. I was about 13 or 14 years old, and I don't think many teenagers concern themselves with such things. But one of my first stepping stones, or one of my earliest checkpoints, was Ray Kurzweil, and one of the books he wrote, titled Fantastic Voyage, Live Long Enough to Live Forever, co-authored with Terry Grossman, the doctor, if I remember correctly. I think it was Kurzweil's doctor, I think, at that time anyway. So I think it's safe to assume that many life extensionists started off mostly as middle-aged people who could feel themselves growing older, getting more achy, professionals, academicians, investors, professors, public figures who start sensing that they might have less time in front of them than they do behind them. So then they get into life extension, research, development. But for me, it was the other way around. I got into this stuff, and as the years went by, I got a bit more worried about the problem of aging, death, what happens after death. What if nothing happens? Does that mean non-existence exists? So, which is a paradox. And before you know it, you're obsessing over paradoxes and puzzles and thought experiments concerning infinity, finity, existence, non-existence, reincarnation, and so on. So that is a big fear of the unknown there. But there are two issues connected here: the problem of death and the problem of suffering. Or alternatively, it could be a tripartite problem: death, aging, and suffering. Personally, I think suffering is a bit more of an emergency and moral urgency for thinkers and futurists. Although having said that, death and suffering don't have to be mutually exclusive goals who are kept apart. And likewise, death, aging, and suffering, again, don't have to be mutually exclusive either. So moving into a more multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary future knowledge base could help us identify patterns and what innovations and solutions can be transferable from one problem to the next. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Didar, can you hear me? Okay.
You
Yes.
said, did you say my first name? Didier, is that?
Didier. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Didier.
okay, yeah, sorry, yes. Hello.
We.
Yes.
Hello. Yes, I'm doing two things at the same time. I have many things to. So I wasn't listening since the beginning. I enjoy listening to you, but I don't have many things to say. But still, maybe two or three. The first is for me the most important problem at the moment concerning longevity is the fact that we are still not progressing after thousands of years concerning the maximal life expectancy. The first person who ever reached 100 years, it was the first well-known person who ever reached 100 years. It was the widow of Cicero, more than 2,000 years ago, and we are still not really further. Almost no people. Even in the richest countries are living more than 100 years. This is, when you think, for me, almost incredible that all the progress that we have on a technological aspect and especially on the health aspect, that all these progress are not enough to make it possible for people to live have a maximal lifespan bigger than 2,000 years ago. It's really incredible when you think. So for me, it should be the absolute priority for the people interested in longevity. And second aspect is the last years, or at least probably the last years, there are a lot of startups, companies, and so on investing for aging, against senescence, but they don't start really clinical tests. They don't start really to have proposals. And one of you said just when I arrived, the only real thing for sure at the moment it's metformin. Well, it's not even sure, huh? And the TEM study is not yet started. And recently there was an article about a form of a kind of nematode, not C. elegans, but another one. And the result was it doesn't prolong the life of nematodes, not of all nematodes. So even that is not sure. The TEM study is not yet did not start. Yeah. So for me, how is that possible that we cannot progress for this? And all the rest that we are doing here, like speaking, using the internet, was totally impossible 100 years ago. Strange. That we are able to speak with people from at least 3 continents instantly without any problem, but we are not able to prolong the life of the richest of our citizens, even the richest of our citizens, for even with a few years. Take a look at Bill Gates, the richest guy in the world. He looks almost older than an average man of the same age. Sorry, that's it for the moment.
Okay, very interesting. Professor David Schumacher. There are a few questions for audience, but yes, if you want to add, from audience, Mehdi, what are the predictors of the health, aging, and longevities, and what factor leads to a successful retirement and life in late adulthood? There are some questions here.
Yeah, sure. I'd happy to take a look at those, especially the one on healthy aging. What are the indicators for that? I think there's a lot of us that think we know what they are. Since a youth, I had a mother that always was telling me to eat certain things and do certain things. And when people ask me what they can do to live longer, I say, listen to your mother, because those were all really, really good advices. But when it comes down to really knowing, there are studies that are going on. I'm actually participating in a longitudinal study where I get tested on a regular basis, report what I'm doing, and they're evaluating biomarkers, because we have a lot of ideas on what we think indicates healthy aging or healthy growth, but we need good scientific data behind it to really know for sure. So a lot of these areas are developing, and biomarkers is one of them as well. But we don't have to wait for biomarkers before we can move on. We can do multiple things at a time and keep correlating the data. So that leads into the approach for longevity that I most favor, which is a repair-oriented approach. The complexities of the pathways in our system that contribute to the aging process, as I believe Donald talked about, are very intricate, very involved, and we understand them better than we did yesterday, but we've got a lot of understanding to do going forward. But we can recognize when something's broke. We can recognize things that need to be fixed. And a common analogy is an automobile. I like my automobiles and motorcycles. It's one of my pastimes that I like to do. And I like to I don't do any personal rebuilding myself, but I really appreciate those who do. And you can have 100-year-old automobile that works as good today as it did, maybe even better today than it did when it was first built. But that's because we understand how to fix all the different aspects of that. We don't understand all that in humans, but as we pursue how to do that, we can do that better. I think unconsciously, we've done some of that in the past without calling it that. The idea of antibiotics and some of the other drugs that have come along have been ways of fixing what's going on out there and actually making a significant contribution to average longevity. The maximum age around 120 or so has been with us for a long time. We've had since antiquity people that could live to that age. The difference is very, very few of them live to that age. And as we get better at fixing things as we move along, we can have more and more people that can live longer and longer, and that's why the average lifespan comes up. And there's, once again, many different aspects to that as well. So how do we know what we need to do? We can look at the results, and we can see what makes things better. We can see what doesn't work. But I also want to say one quick thing, which is we don't want to get trapped into a one-size-fits-all situation. I have friends that take metformin, for example, and are convinced that it works for them. I have friends that take rapamycin, for example, and they're convinced that it works for them. And I have people that it doesn't work for at all. I have a particular therapy that I do that works for a very small number of people, but I can document that it works for me. So this is why individualized medicine that Edward was talking about going forward is so important. We won't have a single longevity pill that will make people live past 120 or to 200 or 500 or even 80 or 90. It's going to take multidiscipline approach in parallel working forward. There you are, Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Edward.
Yeah, of course. Again, I find myself in complete agreement with David. So there it is. But I'm gonna hit a couple of high points here about moving ahead because the technology is, first of all, it's a process. Okay, it just like, again, I've always given the example of a smartphone. I can give the example of personal computers where 20 years ago we didn't have them, or 30 years ago only a small percentage of people had them, and over time prices go down. Products and services get better. More and more people can have them. Again, that's why we're having this wonderful conversation over 3 or 4 continents. I'm not even sure how many. But a couple of the important points. First of all, we have a regulatory process in the United States, and I know something about the process in Britain and some of the other countries, including Asian countries, including Japan, for example, that is pretty antiquated. And that's one of the big problems. And if you go to the Revolution Against Aging and Death conference, there's always going to be a big talk about the Food and Drug Administration. There was a study done a few years ago that showed that it takes 10 to 12 years at a cost of about $3 billion when you include capital cost to bring a new product from research lab to patient. And a lot of that is because the clinical trials that are considered the gold standard really take too long. If you're going to take 3, 4, 5, 6 years to develop a product, lots of people are going to suffer and die. In 1992, in the United States here, our Food and Drug Administration created a parallel track to put AIDS drugs that were still in clinical trials open to many more people, and 12,000 people access those drugs who probably would have died without them. And there's legislation right now on Capitol Hill that I've had something to do with on what's called a free to choose medicine approach, that we create that kind of track to get real world data coming in. So once a product is determined to be safe, phase 1, and at least 1 phase 2 efficacy test, it can be accessed by, if David Shoemaker says, hey, this product, my doctor says this product that's being tested looks like it's promising for me, I'm going to try it. And then his data and experience will be put in the database so other researchers can look at it. Real world data. And I won't go into more details, but the point is we have a regulatory system right now that discourages the kind of research that a lot of entrepreneurs are doing that can in fact extend life and health. And that's an important thing. That's one of the big issues I'm working on. A couple of other important points, again, is we have a really messy system in this country of who pays and regulatory system, and we have doctor shortages, frankly, because again, I can give you a whole lot of reasons for that. One of the interesting things in this country is more and more of our physicians and physician assistants and all are from overseas. My family doctor is from India, and my dentist is from Pakistan. The doctors who treated my dad when he was in the hospital last year were from Nigeria. We get all the best coming here, so that's the good news. We need more doctors, and there's a whole issue about how you do that. But the other thing I want to mention is the importance of customer choice. It is important. The reason why we have a dynamic automobile industry and tech industry and so forth is because companies compete to offer goods and services at a better price and at higher quality. That is the market process. And it starts out 15 years ago where only people who had a lot of money could get the beta version of an iPhone that was pretty clunky. And now today the product is readily available. Customer choice is absolutely important. And having a system that gives people an incentive to take care of their own health. We have a sick care system in this country and in most other countries. You get sick and then you have a debate about who pays for it or how you pay for it, of how the service is rationed. I have Canadian relatives who come down to the United States because they don't want to wait 3 months for a certain procedure, for example. But the other thing I want to say, and two final quick points, is there's going to be an attitude issue involved. For example, what happens if I subscribe to a system where I can get all my health care paid for because they're trying to prevent me from getting sick to begin with? What happens when I decide I want to eat some cookies at Christmas time? Do they monitor that my blood sugar is going up and saying I can't eat those cookies? Step away from the buffet table. This is dangerous. I mean, there really are serious things. Now, everybody on this call and out in Asia and on this call, think of the politician you hate the most. It could be Donald Trump. It could be Joe Biden. I don't care which one it is. Pick the one that you loathe the most. Do you want that politician controlling your health care? I sure as heck don't. Okay. So there's going to be a whole issue, a serious issue about who controls, if you want a healthcare system, who's going to tell me whether I can eat a piece of cake or not? It's a serious issue. They're privacy issues that really are serious. The other thing is an attitude issue. The Pew did a survey. That's a big survey company in the United States. Did a survey in 2015 or 2016. A friend of mine actually worked on it, so I had early access to it. And it looked at attitudes towards what we would call longevity medicines and procedures. For example, a chip implant, certain implants for your lungs that would make you twice or three times, better with your lungs and so forth. What's interesting was there was opposition from people in this country we'd call progressive, because they say, well, it won't be equal. If you're a rich white guy, you'll get it, but no one else will. But the point is, every technology starts off as a beta, technology, and then it expands. The final thing I want to say, this is the World Talent Economic Forum. I want to look at that word talent. I disagree that individuals are not important. Yes, we all are benefiting from the insights and the research of others. But why wasn't there a Steve Jobs 20 years before? Why did the Romans have all of the technology? They could do printing presses. They had stamps. They had what amounted to paper. They could have done printing presses, but no one thought of it until Gutenberg. You can take a look at other inventions. The Romans actually had all the technology to do railroads. They actually had wooden rails, carts on those rails, and so forth. I'm going to have to take a phone call, but talent is important.
Thank you, Professor Edward. Actually, every Friday we have debate. So I believe that you can join in the debate, and definitely it will be very fruitful sessions. So this week we have a debate. Our debate topic, this house believes that university education should be free. So those who want to join in our debate, you can. It's open for everyone. Professor David Jekali from Alea, there is a question. I think that you can give this answer. So Alea want to know what is the reason that is a general people in developed countries have a high life expectancy and the people in underdeveloping countries have a lower life expectancy.
Well,
Is it correct?
I think that's primarily economics. You know, the medical system is not evenly spread. Some of the stuff that developed countries are doing is very costly, but it's raised the standard of living, which has raised the life expectancy. And then until we can help those countries catch up, they're going to have lower life expectancies. And I think, frankly, it's our ethical duty to help those countries do that.
Thank you, Professor Donald.
Well, I wanted just to address the regulatory thing and point out something that's really worth thinking about, which is I want to go back to that Alzheimer's drug that they're selling for something like $20,000 for a course of it that doesn't work. And when you get into something like life extension and you want to ask the question, is the intervention we're doing actually extending people's lives? How do you know that? Because the only way that you could really know it is to take two groups of people. One of the groups of people take the treatment, the other people don't take the treatment. No one knows which is which, and then wait until they start dying, and then ask yourself the question, well, we need to compare these two groups, because double-blind studies are really the only way that we know of to answer that question. I want to point out that the placebo effect is real. And when you take a placebo, your body actually does measurable things that change. So for instance, if you're in pain and you take a placebo, a certain percentage of people actually produce endorphins, which are the key pain relief chemical that your body produces to be able to mitigate pain. And so, in fact, opiates mimic endorphins, and that's how they work. They're kind of exogenous endorphins, and so if we have two people, somebody take a drug, we don't really know for sure if it's the drug that's changing how they are. And I think going back to that Alzheimer's drug that doesn't work, we had a theory of what was causing the damage from Alzheimer's. And this drug addressed that theory. It said, okay, based on this theory, we're going to mitigate this particular problem. So the idea is if people have less of these beta amyloid plaques, then they are going to have less damage. And so they developed a drug that reduced it. And what they learned from that drug is that they were wrong. It was something else going on that was causing the damage. So the whole system of being able to do these studies to try and understand whether things work or not is critical. I mean, otherwise, every kind of snake oil that anybody comes up with is just as good as any other snake oil. I mean, what percentage of people get well from COVID anyway? Like, something like 98% or 97% of people. I mean, they get long COVID, but basically they don't die. So if you give 100 people ivermectin, and 97 of them are going to live, is it the ivermectin that's doing it? How do we know? How do we answer that question? So with life extension, one of the major difficulties is that it takes a long time to answer that question, and it'll take a long time. And so, Edward was talking about a dystopian future where people check their blood sugar. Some external person checks your blood sugar. My wife was testing a continuous blood sugar monitor. In fact, a great story is I have a friend who's diabetic. She's type 1 diabetic, and she's been diabetic since she was a child. And there's glucose monitors that you can take, and there's insulin pumps. But the glucose monitors and the insulin pumps are not tied together. So, ideally what would happen is it would measure your blood sugar on a continuous basis. If your blood sugar got too low, the insulin pump would trigger, and it would put insulin in your blood just like an artificial pancreas, basically, is the way it works. And so as an open source project, hundreds and hundreds of programmers got together and they wrote software, open source software that actually does that. So she's got a continuously pumped glucose monitor. Things like that are accessible to us right now. And we can change the quality of life. Type 2 diabetes, my wife, as I said, is a nurse practitioner. Her number one complaint that people have, the number one illness that they have is type 2 diabetes. And so we've got a lot of stuff that we can do to mitigate like known things that we can look at in a shorter term and actually test and check and see whether they work or not. And then, the longer term things I think are great ideas, but the kind of studies that have been done are super small, and we really don't have an answer to any of that yet. So that's.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Adam.
Thank you. A few things Mr. Donald said during the first round jumped out at me, like when metformin was mentioned. I have a sizable number of life extensionists and full-blown immortalists on my Facebook friends list, and so I had seen metformin mentioned in comments, posts, statuses, supplement groups, and nootropic groups, and that reminded me of Ray Kurzweil again, especially around the time I was reading his Fantastic Voyage book, when he was consuming no fewer than 250 different vitamin pills and supplements, which staggered me at the time. Now it's not so shocking for me anymore, but I do remember clearly the reactions of people I discussed these interests with all those years ago. And I became quite obsessed with this topic and related topics, and the movers and shakers of big names like Kurzweil and other individuals. I became obsessed. I was convinced I was born in the first generation of humans with a chance at living indefinitely. Well, not even just that. I was convinced I was going to be one of the first human immortals, or human to post-human. So whilst there still is a glimmer of hope that I could live indefinitely, I was born in 1989. So hopefully I will eventually reach the 2050s, 2060s, 2070s, fingers crossed, where by that time we would have achieved these discoveries and made them available. But I will not hold my breath regarding actually being literally immortal yet, which, like I said, back then was a visionary realization about 15 years ago, delusional, you could say. It was almost messianic. And so, of course, it was a matter of time before I collided with the big elephant in the room, which is succinctly the problem of extending life in order to continue enjoying that which enriches your life, gives you pleasure, makes life worth living enough to want to extend it in the first place, which really made itself known to me when I unfortunately developed an eating disorder because I had OCD, and I tried to follow Kurzweil's dietary suggestions word for word to the letter, to the point that I became scared to put anything into my mouth and body with even the slightest amount of MSG, trans fats, or molecule of sugar, and so on. I remember having half an avocado for breakfast one time. I just felt dizzy and continued like this until I binged on carbs and sweets later that day. So I became orthorexic in my quest to live long enough to live forever. I wasn't enjoying my life much at that period of time, so I was effectively punishing myself with misplaced asceticism. And again, I remember reading an article about Life Extension Conference, and the author or journalist or whoever wrote it was surprised to see two individuals involved in that field, in that study, spark up a cigarette outside on a lunch break or something, and then he used that to illustrate the dilemma of allowing oneself to enjoy the things that make life worth living and worth extending for as well. So it's a balance or a paradox, like chickens and eggs. And furthermore, I was pleased when Mr. Donald mentioned about dying from psychosomatic crises and traumatic events like loneliness and heartbreak, which is very relevant and needs to be addressed in this post-COVID era. And that, of course, that loops back to what Tom Ross said in a previous episode about not automatically rejecting some stuff that was kind of not mainstream science. So yeah, thanks. Oh, he's gone.
Yeah, it looks like we lost Sharif.
Well,
Perhaps.
And hi,
Just get started.
Speaking of healthcare, I've been on the phone for the last 10 minutes trying to get something set up for my daughter, which finally maybe is set up if they can find a calendar. So, so I can tell you all about it from personal experience. But anyway, it looks like Sharif is gone, and so I don't know where we are.
So Edward, I will answer to you provocative statements, if I can say. First, to say I totally agree to the aspects that we have. I think you were saying more or less that to accelerate clinical tests, and for this, bureaucracy is really incredibly slow. But not only bureaucracy, it's also let's say bureaucracy coming from companies. But I disagree. Well, I would prefer my worst political enemy. Sharif, you're back. I'm just finishing then. I would prefer my let's say worst political enemy, but who is good enough to be elected to decide what people can eat and what people can have as drugs and so on, than to have private companies who would be able to sell and to make advertisement and to sell things who are not proven good. And well, maybe US is a good example, but US is the best place in the world to have medical research. It should be the best place in the world to have medical care. But it's and it's one of the, let's say, most libertarian, even if it is very far from libertarian, but one of the most libertarian places if you compare to Europe. And it's also one of the places where the life expectancy is the shortest. It's a difference of 3-4 years if you compare with Europe. And it's in the countries where you have the strongest, let's say, governmental, where you have the strongest governmental decisions concerning healthcare, that you have the longest life expectancy. So that's in a few words. So to accelerate clinical research, you will need to change the laws concerning clinical trials. But I'm not sure at all. I would say I would be curious, Edward, to know what's your opinion about IP and all, because for me it's even more central as a source of problem. And for me, logical libertarians should be against all rules related to IPs, because they are certainly imposed by the state. But for me, that's a big source of problems, and probably one of the reasons, for example, that metformin is still not tested, because there is no more patent possibility on metformin. So big companies, they try something else. But that's it in short.
Thank you. This is really great discussion. I'm getting very good audience response. They really like to this discussions. Beside that, we have some good projects. We are starting with Indian government water ministries. You know that 22nd March is a water day. So we will develop a projects with these Indian governments and the Rotary Club. Perhaps they are one of the largest Rotary Club. Besides that, we will train 3,220 students of the grassroots level, and they also attend. We will choose around 7 speakers. They will attend the special dialogue with our honorable speakers. Side by side, we also develop another 2 projects with Sabah and Sarawak. This is the island of Malaysia, but definitely they are the state government, so we will do work with them, and as well as we are working with the Australian government. So these years we have World Talent Economy Forum. We have a strong commitment with the Asia Pacific. Hopefully, more good news we can bring for this World Talent Economy Forum speakers and for the audience, because speakers are the key for us, because always they support us and they give lot of good informations for our audience. That's why different countries, governments, and corporations, they believe that World Talent Economy Forum really helpful for them. And side by side, we are working with impact investment. So many important corporations from around the world, they're already supporting World Talent Economy Forums to develop some good projects. So hopefully our dialogue, not only it will be dialogue, we will take more actions for developing world, definitely with the help of developed world, because developed world has technology, they have knowledge, they have resources. So these collaborations actually help us to develop our ecosystem. So thank you everyone. This is really good discussions, and I believe that developing world, they're seriously thinking about this longevity as well as healthcare issues. So hopefully we can arrange some good summit in the future. I directly want to go for the concluding remarks. I want to give chance Professor Edward, but remember Professor Edward, like Friday we have debate, so you can attend in the debate. I believe that you will be the great speakers for the debate. Definitely your friends, Professor Donald, regularly waiting for you. Especially,
Okay.
I think
Well,
if you want to
yeah,
do
I'm not
debate.
sure if I'll be around on Friday, but I certainly like doing these forums. Hopefully, I'll get
Yes,
on to a debate at some
this
point.
debate is very important. You are from academy, so we
Mhm.
choose the topic. This house believe that university education should be free.
Mhm.
So I don't know what part you want to go
Yeah.
for
Anyway,
government or
as I say, there's some schedule issues, but anyway, but yeah, I'll just make my final remarks. I mean, I think my earlier remarks speak for themselves, and anyone listening to me today, especially in the Asian Pacific area, talent is to me most important. It's both book learning, it's world experience, and it's entrepreneurial experience. I've argued, and I will continue to argue, that it's not just massive social eco forces that are driving the world. You have those forces, but it's individuals who take advantage, who come up with innovations, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's researchers, or in whatever area. We have the opportunity with the technology today to extend lifespan and health span. And it's a privilege to work with people like David Shoemaker and others on these issues, and with you, Sharif. And as I say, this is one of my big areas right now in the United States, but this is a global issue. And the people in the Asia Pacific area, you world talent folks listening to this broadcast, you can be the cutting edge, because in this country, I mentioned how many people from all different lands come here, and they're the innovators in every industry. But we know that you guys can do it in your own countries, and you girls, women can do it in your own countries, because I've got 2 daughters and they're going to hopefully be good entrepreneurs. So that's what I want to see, an open system where freedom allows us to innovate and allows us to use that technology and, live long and prosper. And I've got to get off, but thank you.
Just Edward, just one word. Can you answer? Are you for or against patents? In
Patents?
short.
I'm for patents, but with certain exceptions. But we can talk about that
Okay.
later. Okay.
That's not
Adios.
libertarian to me, but okay.
Okay. Ciao. Up you today. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Professor Edward. Professor David Shoemaker, what's your concluding remarks?
Well, to conclude for today, I want to say that I think cautious optimism is a good way forward. I haven't seen too many innovations that have come from people with a negative mindset, but a Pollyanna mindset doesn't work either. So cautious optimism seems to be that sweet spot for me. Another thing that I want to suggest is pragmatism. Look for things that work. And I tend to overanalyze things. And the reason I mentioned pragmatism is sometimes I can get so much into the analysis of how something's working, I forget the value that it comes from the fact that it just is working. As Adam was talking about it, if it's something that reduces suffering, then yes, I want to understand how it works. But the fact that it reduces suffering or creates joy or some positive input in society, that's what's really important. And then the last thing I'll leave you with is we need to continue to push forward, make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, and continue to push forward. Stopping is the worst thing that we can do. Because I think that we are at what we would call the knee of the curve as far as technology development. As we look to the past, we see incremental development in a lot of different areas. That's great. I've built a career in my particular area on incremental improvement. But I think because of the convergence of the technologies and the fact that the technologies build upon each other, I think we're going to have a certain amount of incremental improvement that is really, really hard for us humans to get our minds around because we are so locked into the incremental, progressive, linear style world. So stay cautiously optimistic and be happy when you find something that works for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor David Jekali, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Well, I think I want to just mention that, you know, in our research, one of the things we did was to build a computationally sound ethical model or model of ethics. And, you know, there's only a handful of absolutes that are just absolute, but based on those models, and the reason for doing that is if we're going to create AGI, we want to be able to teach AGI an ethical model that they logically can't work themselves out of. And one of the derivatives of that model is your super longevity. I mean, it is one of the most ethical or highest priority things we can possibly do is super longevity or biological immortality and the preservation of the species indefinitely. And I know for our lab, even though we're focused on artificial intelligence, any time we can contribute to longevity science, we're going to do it. And I hope that other people will do it as well. And that we start treating old age as a disease. And you know, I hope to be around for the next 500 years. So that's my concluding remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor David Jekali. Professor Donald.
I want to say first off, I didn't say that metformin works. What I said is metformin is the first one they're actually studying for that purpose. It's a project at Stanford. We'll find out if it works probably after I'm gone, but it works in a way where we might be able to model human body well enough that some of our models of we are to some degree, we know what the actual chemical process is that's taking place, like what happens when a virus invades your cell. We understand those chemical processes, and we're able to more and more directly address those chemical processes. We're a very complicated system, and there's always a possibility of unintended consequences. And so it's something that we're aiming towards. But I would say that we could eventually get to the point where the kind of human trials that are necessary now become less necessary because we actually know what we're doing. but I don't see that happening very soon. I mean, we get optimistic about that, and then once we start digging into it, the more you know, the more you don't know. You don't know is one of the things that's really, really true. About the whole thing of health, it's important to understand that the lifespan in the United States hasn't been going up, it's been going down. So it's the only country in the developed world since the Industrial Revolution where lifespan peaked and then started going down. And that's something that you have to ask why. And the answer boils down to social factors. And in the United States, we have a system of healthcare that denies healthcare to people. It doesn't really also have a much emphasis on the psychological aspects of healthcare, because some of the problem is fentanyl addiction to opiates that you can overdose on very easily. And what can we do? I think that we look at our biological selves, but we also really start to need to look at our social selves. Like when I lived in Finland, they had a high suicide rate. They were concerned about the high suicide rate, so they invested a bunch of money into social programs and investigations of why they had a high suicide rate and what they could do to be able to change that suicide rate. Now the United States has a higher suicide rate than Finland. And these kinds of things work. So when we're looking at life extension, quality of life is as important as quantity of life. We would love to give more quantity of life and have people live to 150 or 200 or however long they could possibly live. That's a very, very difficult problem that we're not really sure what to do about that. That's something that we need to learn how to do. We don't know yet. But we do know a lot about helping people have a better quality of life. And I think that any country, any developing nation, any group of people, any group of friends, any group of people can start developing an attitude of, it sounds like somebody said, your mom used to say, eat your vegetables, don't eat candy. These are various things. Sugar rots your brain. And, we talk about, I think one person said, I'd rather have the worst politicians decide than any corporation. And I think there's a lot to that, because right now, one of the reasons that my wife sees so much diabetes is because of sugary drinks, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and things like that. Her community is lower income Hispanic people, mostly farm workers. And they just drink Coke and Pepsi like crazy, and it rots their pancreas, and they get diabetes. So I could see that being regulated on a government level, and not, I wouldn't feel that it's the same thing as somebody implanting something in me and deciding where I'm going to go. I think one of the things that Edward does is he makes these dichotomies that are really basically very extreme. So he gets hyperbolic. He says he gets the most huge extreme and says, well, we shouldn't have government involved because we're going to have this incredible extreme. But as I said, countries like Finland, the Nordic countries, they live much longer than we do. And it's because they believe that when people around them are better off, they're better off too. So they're willing to pay higher taxes. They're willing to do different kinds of things to intervene in the society itself and make a difference in society. And I really want to end with emphasizing something that David Schumacher said, which is that we need to experiment. Their first head of the American Psychological Association was a guy named Lester Ward. And Lester Ward developed the kind of sociology, I don't remember exactly the name, but his whole idea is that we should try things and see if they worked or not and learn from things. So he said, if we have the tools to make society better through our new knowledge of statistics and things like that, that we can actually get some sort of feedback from what we're trying, is it moral not to try? And I agree with him. He wasn't trying to come up with absolutes like Marx or Weber or something like that. He was saying, we don't know. And the only way to learn is to try things. And I think that's an important thing to realize how much the social aspect of it is basically controlling it, and then start trying things and see if they work. That's what they do in Finland. They'll try something and they'll go, oh, it didn't work, let's try something else. I mean, they're fine with it. They're not set on the idea that they're going to come up with the perfect thing. They know they have to learn. So we can all learn.
Thank you everyone for joining today's session, and thank you our speakers as well as our audience. This is really great session. See you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye.